We've talked as a legal industry for 30, 40, 50 years, saying that we should have a standard for the legal system to be able to say, we're all counting the same things, so we should be using the same language, much like ISO uses the same language to be able to interoperate. An example of that is if you have a breach of contract motion to dismiss in front of Judge Smith in the Southern District of New York, you should be able to use that with vendor number 1 and vendor number 2 and vendor number 3. That is each of the things I mentioned, breach of contract, motion to dismiss, Southern District of New York, Judge Smith. Each of those things are among the 10,000 things that SALI is counting.
Today on Law Next, should the legal industry have a common set of standards for classifying the work we do? The SALI Alliance, short for Standards Advancement for the Legal Industry, believes we should. And it recently released version 2.0 of its legal matter standards specification, which sets out an ontology of some 10,000 tags. To discuss this, my guest today is Damien Riehl, who is part of the leadership team of the SALI Alliance and who has played a key role in developing the specification. In his day job, Damien works at Fastcase, where he is Vice President for Litigation, Workflow, and Analytics Content. He's also co-founder of All the Music LLC, a project that seeks to copyright every possible musical melody. This is Bob Ambrogi, and you're listening to Law Next, the podcast that features the innovators and entrepreneurs who are driving what's next in law. Before we get to today's interview, let's hear about the sponsors who make this podcast possible. Are you getting lost in the shuffle of managing your practice? With Practice Panther, you can manage it all in one user-friendly interface. The legal practice management platform offers industry-leading native solutions to manage your cases, automate your billing, process online payments, send documents for e-signatures, and communicate with clients from anywhere. Learn why Practice Panther is the preferred solution for tens of thousands of lawyers by visiting them at practicepanther.com. And now on to my interview with Damien Riehl. Damien, welcome to Law Next.
Thanks so much, Bob, for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here.
And a special thanks to you for joining me from your vacation getaway in northern Minnesota somewhere, or eastern Minnesota, I guess, or western. Where is that? That would be western Minnesota.
It's true. It's a bit western Minnesota, and if you hear loons in the background, it's one of the 10,000 lakes here.
Oh, lovely. Oh, fantastic. So before we start talking about SALI, let's turn to that all-important question of who are you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do in your day job.
Sure. Been a lawyer since 2002. So before joining legal tech, I litigated as a lawyer for Robbins Kaplan, a big law firm. Litigated for about 15 years, and I represented big law. That is, I represented Best Buy and sued Bernie Madoff victims and that kind of stuff. But I'm also a coder since 1985. So I have the law plus tech background. So in 2015, when I decided to leave the practice of law and I pitched Thomson Reuters with something, I said, here's a legal tech that I think can change the world. You should build it and hire me. TR was dumb enough to do that. So I worked for them for a couple of years building a really big thing. I can't say because of confidentiality, but I will say that afterward, there was a product that was released and did not last very long after I left. But we had grand plans, I will say. That's probably something that I could say but it was a really good idea, I would say. But after leaving TR, I then worked for a cybersecurity company where the biggest thing I did was Facebook hired me and my company to investigate Cambridge Analytica. So I spent about a year of my life on Facebook's campus Monday through Friday, working with their data scientists and machine learning folks and my former FBI, CIA, NSA people that worked for me to try to figure out how bad guys were using Facebook data. So anyway, I did that really cool job for about a year and a half. And then I left that really cool job to join Fastcase, where I essentially do data science for the law, taking our 670 million judicial opinions and lawyer file documents and extracting the stuff that matters from them, which includes the stuff that the SALI Alliance has been counting. So we're using data science for the law and applying the 10,000 tags that SALI has to those.
And so if you started coding in 1985, that had to have been well before you went to law school. Did you go to law school thinking you were going to were you going to use, was the coding at all related to your going to law school?
It was, yeah. So I went to law school in St. Paul, Minnesota, and of course, Thomson Reuters has a big presence in Minnesota. Yeah. So when I was working for the federal courts before I went to law school, I was saying to a federal judge, an Article III judge, I said, I think I want to work in legal tech. And he said, oh, you don't want to do that because that's where lawyers go to die. But of course, that's not accurate at all. And sadly, that judge has passed away now, and I'm having a ball doing legal tech these days.
Well, we'll all die eventually, even those of us in legal tech, but hopefully it doesn't accelerate it in any way.
It's true.
It keeps me young, I feel like. But
indeed, yeah, especially compared to the litigator side. I say a litigator is more likely to die young than a legal tech person.
Yeah. So as I say, your day job is at Fastcase, but you've been putting a lot of work into the SALI Alliance, and I know because you told me so that this is all pretty much volunteer work on your part. And I think pretty much everybody involved in the SALI Alliance is doing this on a volunteer basis. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but
that's 100% right. Yeah, we are a nonprofit. Everyone is a volunteer, and the SALI standard itself is free, open source. So there's no profit involved in SALI.
So let's start with the basics, and just let me ask you what is SALI, and how did it kind of come to be?
Sure. SALI is a standard, much like ISO is a standard. So think about it, an ISO has standards for what are the currency, standards for what is a location, that is it in Africa, is it in Asia? It also has standards for all sorts of things so that you don't have to recreate the wheel as you are, building a system. So you could just use the ISO standard. In the same way, we've talked as a legal industry for, 30, 40, 50 years, I would guess, saying that we should have a standard for the legal system to be able to say we're all counting the same things. So we should be using the same language, much like ISO uses the same language to be able to interoperate. So an example of that is if you have a breach of contract motion to dismiss in front of Judge Smith in the Southern District of New York, you should be able to use that with vendor number 1 and vendor number 2 and vendor number 3. That is each of the things I mentioned, breach of contract, motion to dismiss, Southern District of New York, Judge Smith. Each of those things are among the 10,000 things that SALI is counting. So the benefit of that is, of course, if all the vendors and all of the law firms and all of the clients are tagging Southern District of New York, for example, with the same tag, then you can start pushing data to and from the clients and the law firms and the vendors, and not just one vendor, but all of the vendors. So we can start creating an ecosystem where data can be interoperable rather than at least the past state where you had to do a one-to-one mapping saying, what does TR call Southern District of New York? Then have to say, okay, and now what does Lexis call the Southern District of New York? And then what does Fastcase call the Southern District of New York? If everyone uses the SALI tag for Southern District of New York, which they're starting to do, that is TR, Lexis, Fastcase, and Intap, and a whole bunch of others are tagging all these, then you as a law firm would essentially be able to say, hey, TR, here's the SALI tag for Southern District of New York. Give me all the motions to dismiss that are from that. And then you can use that same API query to go to Lexis when they do it, and the same API query to go to my company, Fastcase, to be able to give you all those things. So this is really enabling interoperability amongst all the players in the ecosystem in a way that's never been done before.
When you say that we need these kind of standards in the legal industry, I mean, and there have been, I don't know if you call them standards, but there have been, leads codes or ABA task codes. Why aren't those sufficient for what you're talking about?
I'm really glad you mentioned that because those are very important steps, I would say, on the path towards standardization. And they were really good for their time. And so leads codes to be able to say, this is what we're billing for example. And the ABA task codes, these are kind of the substantive things that we're doing. And so I would say that we at SALI are standing on the shoulders of those giants. So we incorporate the leads codes, we incorporate the ABA task codes, and we go even farther than them. For example, ABA task code is a deposition. And so we at SALI say that a deposition is a task, but to be really, to be able to say how much something is priced, you have to do both the substance of law and the business of law. So for example, if someone says, how much does a deposition cost? I would say, well, it depends. Is it a slip and fall case or is it a patent infringement case, right? And am I taking the deposition or am I defending the deposition? And is the deposition of a corporate representative or is it a deposition of a fact witness or is it a deposition of an expert witness? Because each of those moves the needle to pricing as to more expensive or less expensive. Each of those things that I mentioned is in the SALI tags, that it is not in the ABA task codes. And so patent infringement is not, of course, in the ABA task codes, but it is in SALI. Taking a deposition or defending a deposition or merely observing a deposition, each of those is a SALI tag. So that way, if you want to be able to say how much does a deposition cost, you'll run a query on all of your matters to be able to say, show me all the depositions where it's a patent infringement, a deposition where we're defending each of those as a tag, and then you're able to get better apples-to-apples comparisons as to how much a deposition costs.
So it sounds like you're talking about not just tagging, but using tags to show context and relationships more than standard codes would do.
That's exactly right. Yes. And I'm glad you said relationships, because there is we at SALI create a graph database. That is, people who are familiar with Google know about the knowledge graph. That everything that Google does is in the knowledge graph. Same with Facebook. Facebook also has a knowledge graph. Amazon has a knowledge graph. And that's the reason that Amazon says that if you like this book, then you'll probably also like that book. Is it because it shows the relationships between customers and books that they like, and then other books that are like that book? That is all a graph relationship. So we at SALI also have adopted the graph relationship. We're ontology nerds. We use the RDFS OWL web ontology language to be able to create those graphs. And all of what I've been saying is represented in XML to show all of the relationships, to show that maritime negligence is a cause of action that is argued in maritime court, which is part of the transportation and logistics industry. Each of those is a relationship that is reflected in the XML that is free and open source.
So it's not sort of a fixed field in a database in the way that we traditionally think of a database, but it's a more fluid form of connecting pieces of information. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So if you think there's two types of databases. One is a relational database that is rows and columns. Think Excel spreadsheet, that kind of thing. But this is more of a graph database that is in XML or JSON, depending on how you want to express the graph database. And that's all to say that you can still use SALI in a relational database that is rows and columns. It's still beneficial to you. And in fact, that's what Fastcase does, and that's what TR is doing, and that's what Lexis is doing. But to the extent you also have a knowledge graph, SALI can also be able to be used in that knowledge graph as well.
Yeah. I noticed looking at the SALI website that the version 1.0 of the standards that came out in 2019 or something like that, it was described as a taxonomy. Version 2.0 was described as an ontology. And I assume that was intentional, and I assume that was meant to show both the evolution of what you develop, but to emphasize the very concept that you're talking about right now. I mean, could you kind of talk about what the difference is between a taxonomy and an ontology?
Indeed. Taxonomy has a rigid structure that is a rigid parent-child structure, and an ontology has a more flexible structure. An example of how that's helpful is in a taxonomy, you would have to decide for the cause of action that is negligent misrepresentation. If I say something false about Bob Ambrogi can sue me for negligent misrepresentation.
And I will.
If you ask, you certainly should, especially with your journalism background, you should do that. But though, if you ask three lawyers in a taxonomy, what type of claim is negligent misrepresentation? Lawyer number one would say it is a negligence claim, obviously, and they'd be right. But then lawyer number two would say, yes, but it's also a misrepresentation claim because it's negligent misrepresentation, and they would be right. And then lawyer three would say, well, it's kind of both those things, but it's also a defamation claim because Damien is saying something false about Bob. So in a taxonomy, you would have to choose between negligence or misrepresentation or defamation. But within the ontology, you can have multiple parentage. So a negligence misrepresentation claim is a negligence claim and a misrepresentation claim and a defamation claim. So in your system, if you run a query saying, show me all of the defamation claims, it'll pull in negligent misrepresentation. Or if you run a query for misrepresentation, it'll also pull it up that way. So it'll essentially permit many roads to any particular node that is negligent misrepresentation in a way that is not possible in taxonomies, but it is in ontologies.
Yeah. I want to step back to just kind of talking about the SALI Alliance before we talk more about what you develop. But who is the SALI Alliance? I mean, who is participating in it at this point? How do they become participants in it? What does it mean to be a participant in it?
Yeah, we have many members and many participants in SALI, and it's a consortium of three primary types of stakeholders. Stakeholder number one is the vendors. That is, Thomson Reuters is a member, Lexis is a member, Fastcase is a member, Wolters Kluwer is a member, Intap is a member. So all the legal tech vendors, pretty much all the largest ones, are members. That's the vendor community. You also have the law firm community, where you have some of the largest law firms in the world are members of SALI. And then you also, the third category is the client community. That is corporations. So Microsoft, Intel, and a whole bunch of other corporations are active in the SALI Alliance. So what makes SALI unique from this perspective is a consortium of, we are agnostic as to clients or legal tech vendors or to legal providers. That is, we have all of them as stakeholders. Therefore, we are serving all of those populations equally and we are agnostic as to perspective. We don't use the words client or representative very often because often, when does a matter start? Well, it starts at a different time for a company than it starts for the law firm that they hire, which is a different start time for a matter when the vendors get involved. So at any rate, we are agnostic as to the participant, and therefore we can serve all those constituencies.
And who is SALI to be the one to set these standards? I mean, there have been other attempts at least talking about or defining standards in the legal industry. Why should SALI be leading the charge on this, or why should others, follow SALI in leading the charge on this?
Sure. And part of it is that, it's why do you climb Mount Everest? Because it should be done and because it's there, right? And so I would say that SALI was the one to start on this monumental task because we are the ones that stepped up. And we said this is the way forward is to be able to have standard metadata tags, that is 10,000 metadata tags, in a way that helps vendors and lawyers and the clients. So that's answer number one, which is kind of the glib answer, is that it needed to be done. So we've stepped up.
That's actually a pretty good answer right there. If nobody else was doing it, but that's... Yeah.
Right. It's true. It's true. And it's really, really hard. And it's also, you could imagine against what one would think of the vendor's best interest. Because if the vendor can make a standard proprietary to that vendor, then there's benefits business-wise from being able to keep that proprietary. So this interoperability, at least conventional wisdom would be the interoperability would make a company lose money rather than gain money. So that's one of the, roadblocks to why there hasn't been a standard up to this point. Why the tables have turned, or maybe a better analogy is why the tides have changed, is because more clients and more law firms are demanding that the vendors are interoperable amongst themselves, that is, amongst each other. And so there's been demand side from the law firms. And there's also, we're solving a problem. SALI is solving a problem for vendors as well. I've asked Thomson Reuters, and Thomson Reuters has given me permission to say this, is that we at SALI are solving a problem for Thomson Reuters because Thomson Reuters has acquired many companies over the course of its history. And so the people we're working with at TR have been charged with, you need to make all of your companies interoperable. That is, you need to have the metadata tags talk to each other from company 1 to company 40 that are under our umbrella. So what TR is doing is they're actually using SALI as that translation piece to be able to let company 1 talk to company 40. And then also in the process of doing that mapping up between company 1 and company 40, they're also opening up the SALI standard to the outside, that is to their users. So we're killing two birds with one stone, that they're permitting intra-company interoperability to speak within the company from all the different subsidiaries, and then also allowing external. So anyway, we're killing two birds with one stone, and we're essentially allowing this law firm demand and intra-company communication to be able to push SALI forward, and that seems to be successful.
The SALI Alliance has developed a legal matter standard specification that sets out an ontology of some 10,000 tags. But how did it go about coming up with those tags in the first place? And now that it has them, how can they be used by legal professionals? We'll get to all of that in just a moment, but first, let's hear from the generous sponsors who support this podcast. Practice Panther is the all-in-one legal management platform trusted by tens of thousands of lawyers to manage their practice. Easily track time, process online payments, share documents for e-signature, send business text messages, and so much more without ever leaving the platform. Learn how Practice Panther can automate your business at practicepanther.com. SALI Alliance has developed what it hopes will become a commonly accepted set of standards within the legal industry for tagging data. My guest Damien Riehl played a central role in developing those standards. As we return, we talk more about how the standards were developed, how they can be used, and to what extent the legal profession is adopting them. So with this latest legal matters specification standard, LMSS, I guess you're calling it, that came out just in the spring, I think you came out with this year. How did you go about building it? I mean, how do you even begin to come up with defining the tags that should be used? I mean, and to be clear, you're talking about defining the tags that govern both sort of the practice of law and the business of law. It's not just about the practice of law. I mean, we get the West Key number, maybe it could do that, I guess, but we're really talking about the whole high level view of what lawyers do and how their relationships with clients and companies and vendors and courts and everything else. So how do you build that?
Yeah, so the answer is with a lot of hard work, hundreds and hundreds of hours, and actually the genesis of SALI, at least for me, was right here at a cabin in Alexandria, Minnesota, on my PTO, on my vacation days. I was looking over this lake and going over, for example, I was looking at jury instructions for California, Texas, Florida, New York, and Illinois, and then normalizing all of the causes of action for all the jury instructions. So breach of contract.
This was on your vacation.
Misrepresentation. That was on my vacation, right? Much to the sadness of my family, who definitely would have preferred that I be on the lake with them. But this, to people that are excited about this, it was groundbreaking for me because I thought this is a way that we can essentially open source the DNA of the law. So I ingested all of the causes of action. I ingested all of the jurisdictions. We pulled from the Free Law Project to be able to say, here's the Southern District of New York and the City Court of New York City, right? And this borough and that borough. So we have about, I think, 2,000 different jurisdictions. We've pulled in all of the ways that you can engage a lawyer. That is a flat fee versus hourly fee, or by project, et cetera. So really, these 10,000 have been me and the team SALI essentially accumulating from all of these different sources, including leads, including the ABA task codes that we've ingested, including the national state court standard that is in there. We've ingested that, and we've ingested ISO codes for locations. We've ingested all of these things. And then the way that it ultimately got approved for version 2 is we used a Stanford tool called Web Protege, which is, you can think of it like Google Docs for ontologies. So you can be able to, I as a user and all of the, I think we have now 85 people that have signed up for Web Protege, can all see the in-progress standard. And for any one of these things that we're tagging, somebody can make a comment and say, Damien, I think this is the dumbest thing on the planet. I think you need to be able to change this. And then everybody gets that comment and somebody else can chime in and say, yeah, that is really dumb, Damien. Why don't you put this thing here or rather than there? So we have this kind of community discussion as to whether this thing belongs there or whether there should be other things that we're counting too. And then once we resolve those, which we always do, then after there's solidification, we say, okay, this is the near release version. Any objections? No objections. We move forward with version 2. And now we're building version 2.1. So it's a consensus-based way that all of our stakeholders are able to have input. And largely, to a person, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say, I think you're chasing the wrong things. To a person, everyone seems to be saying that, yes, we solved the business problem and we solved the technologist problem because it's an XML that can be ingested easily and incorporated into systems.
Yeah, and to any user who's interested in exploring that, you can go to sali.org and there's a link to the Web Protege tool as well as, I guess, a sort of a generic username and password that anybody can log in and explore it a little bit. I'm not somebody who spends my vacations ingesting jury instructions from California or that sort of thing, but I've played around with it. I've explored it a little bit, and I kind of went in with an eye of, it's got to be missing something. I'm sure I'm going to find something they don't have in there, and I couldn't find it. But I didn't spend that much time exploring it, really.
And I love that you said that because I've heard what you've said come from out of many mouths, which makes me very happy. Because I think with 10,000 things that we're counting, I think that we've covered the breadth of the things. And to the extent we haven't covered a thing that matters, tell us. And we'll add it. It's really easy to be able to add something that matters. For example, we have motion to dismiss, which is pretty much universal. But of course, in California, motion to dismiss is called a demurrer. And so anyway, so we show the relationship between motions to dismiss and demurrer. So if someone says, "Oh, you're missing demurrer," I say, "No, look at the standard. We actually have that as part of motion to dismiss." At any rate, so if we're missing something, please tell us and we'll fix it.
So, so you have these 10,000 tags. How do they get used? Where do you use them, and what kinds of settings or applications, or where would people use them?
An example of, there's people ask, how do I become SALI compliant? And I often answer, if you incorporate one tag, you're SALI compliant. If you incorporate all 10,000 tags, you're also SALI compliant, right? So it's people incorporating them really runs the gamut. The baby steps that people often take that law firms often take are, what are the areas of law? For example, patent law is an area of law. So essentially mapping the areas of law that I as a law firm have counted, and then map those to what the areas of law that SALI has counted. So for example, I looked at a law firm that talks about their quote unquote area of law is PTAB appeals. So if I were to map PTAB appeals, I would say, well, PTAB is not an area of law. PTAB is a venue. that is a court. And appeals is not an area of law. Appeals is a service I provide. So really, the area of law is patent law, and the service I provide is appeals, and the venue that I'm providing that for is the PTAB. Each of those things is a SALI tag, and then in that way, you can map the law firm's PTAB appeals to SALI's patent law appeals service and PTAB venue. And that way, then you could be able to say, okay, now that I have mapped those things, I can run a query across Thomson Reuters, and a query across Docket Alarm, and a query across Lexis, using each of those SALI tags to be able to get better results. Show me all the PTAB results now. Anyway, so that's really the way. It's largely, to your question, is largely mapping what I as an organization am counting to what SALI is counting. And if you need help with that, Jim Hannigan, he's a huge member of this. He and I are working hand in hand. We'll help organizations map what they're counting to what we're counting. For example, Thomson Reuters, they've implemented all of their Legal Tracker product. And so what Thomson Reuters did was they uploaded into Web Protege, here are the, I think, 800 or 900 different fields that Legal Tracker was counting. And we've mapped all of those fields to SALI. So we did that for TR. TR is now moving across into all of its applications, that is all of its products, to be able to make them all SALI compliant. So that's really what it is, just mapping fields.
You and I talked last week at the American Association of Law Libraries annual convention, where you were there representing Fastcase, and you were showing me some pretty cool stuff that Fastcase, and specifically Docket Alarm, is doing using these SALI tags. And I think you said at the time that you'd be happy to talk about it on a podcast, but I don't know but you weren't sure how you could do it without the video there to show it. But let's give it a stab. I mean, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about specifically how, you're implementing these tags, how Fastcase is implementing these tags to make Docket Alarm more powerful.
Sure. And so when I joined Fastcase Docket Alarm in July of 2019, I knew that I would need to be able to extract the things that matter. For example, I'd need to extract all the motion types that matter, and I'd need to extract causes of action that matter. So I started building this, and I thought, well, I could build it for Fastcase as a proprietary Fastcase thing, or I could build it for SALI as an open source thing for the better of humanity. And so I opted for the latter. So the things that we've built out is 225 different motion types, all the way from motion to dismiss and motion for summary judgment, all the way down to motions for pro hoc vice, which almost nobody cares about, but we're still counting. So each of the tags that we're counting at the Docket Alarm side, all 225 of them, has a SALI tag on them. So we're also counting them in SALI. So the idea is that if you as a law firm send a SALI API saying, Damien, send me all the motions to dismiss in the Southern District of New York, if you do that today, we would be able to send you back all the motions to dismiss in the Southern District of New York using the SALI tags. So the benefit to the law firm is that if they do that using the SALI API, then they could use that same SALI API to run that same query to TR when they tag those things, and run the same query to Lexis when they do these things. So at any rate, so we're doing it because I was, of course, so integral to building SALI that we at Docket Alarm are building it faster right, than other people are. But other people all have the same code that I do, and they're also implementing it on their side. Yeah. So for example, if you want to say, what are the odds of winning a motion to dismiss in front of Judge Smith for a trademark case in the Southern District of New York, I would give you a percentage. We'd say the odds are 54% in front of this judge for this cause of action in this court. So to be able to, then you could essentially With data science, it's hard to be able to say, what is docket alarm missing, right? So the promise of SALI is that you could run that same query to TR and be able to say, okay, for the stuff that docket alarm doesn't have, what does TR have? Or vice versa. For the stuff that TR doesn't have, what does docket alarm have? And if you use SALI tags, you're able to compare apples to apples.
Yeah. This is maybe a naive question, but I mean, somehow you're doing that tagging. It's not obviously coming from the court pre-tagged in a way that would be nice, I suppose. And maybe that's your pipe dream that starts happening at some point. But is it always going to be the case that Thomson Reuters is going to be tagging data using the same standards? Is the tagging always going to be consistent, so it always is apples to apples, or is there a human error element in the tagging there?
Sure. And what you're asking is, is it more art or is it more science? And having looked through, hundreds of thousands of rows of different docket entries that mention motions to dismiss and motions to terminate and demurs, right? There are only so many ways to be able to express linguistically those concepts, and there are 3 ways: motions to dismiss, motion to terminate, and demur. If somebody finds a 4th, let us know, and we'll add that to SALI too. Right. So at any rate, there's the odds of. So really, the answer to your question depends on the particular tags that are being tagged. If you're talking about motion types, of course, Louisiana is going to have a motion type that we haven't yet counted, and please let us know, and we'll add those. But using the Pareto principle, right, 80 to 90 to 95% of the things that matter, we're already counting, and are going to be uniform in the way that TR tags them, and the way that Lexis tags them, and the way that fast-case docket alarm tags them.
Yeah. Is it your vision that at some point courts will start using SALI tags directly and be putting their data out in that standardized format?
It's definitely my hope that they are. And we're actually doing a bankruptcy group where we're some of the leading bankruptcy practitioners across the United States and a group of bankruptcy judges. That is Article 1 judges that in the bankruptcy side are actually participating in this. So it's my hope that, yes, the courts will see what SALI is doing and saying, wow, that's a lot more helpful than the analytics that we at the federal courts are doing right now. And I'm saying this as a former federal court employee. Before I went to law school, I worked for the bankruptcy court in the clerk's office. And after law school, I worked for an Article 3 district court judge. So having been a federal court employee, I will say that SALI has a lot of benefit for the courts themselves. And if courts are able to tag their data using SALI tags, that will make everyone's lives easier. And we could actually benefit them because docket alarm and TR and Lexis, we can feed them back analytics. Like, is this judge more likely to rule against women litigators than men litigators, right? This is data that docket alarm today can be able to tell you, but the courts probably don't know that data. So at any rate, if the courts tag their data up in SALI, they can get insights back that they wouldn't have otherwise had.
Yeah. Last year in Legal Tech News, Victoria Hudgens wrote an article which said that SALI hadn't gained a whole lot of traction up to that point. And according to her article, she said that that was particularly true among legal tech vendors who were saying that their customers just weren't all that interested in the SALI standards. So what kind of traction have you gained, and how do you get the kind of near universal adoption I think that you would ultimately want to have?
Not to cast dispersions on any particular reporter, but I would say that I would disagree with that assessment. And I think maybe where she got her information is that in large organizations like Thomson Reuters and in Lexis, et cetera, the right hand may not know what the left hand is doing. So I will say that we have active participation by Thomson Reuters, active participation from Lexis, active participation from Westlaw, from Wolters Kluwer, from Intap, we are working with NetDocuments, we're working with iManage. We are working with all sorts of vendors that are saying, yes, of course, SALI is the future because we need this kind of interoperability. We're also working with the largest law firms in the world. Perkins Coie is implementing. Clifford Chance has said that they're implementing. There's all sorts of large law firms, many of whom I can say their names and some of whom I can't. Also, the largest companies in the world, that is Microsoft, Intel, there's all saying, SALI is changing. This is improving something that needs to be changed. So, for example, Jason Barnwell from Microsoft has said that for one of his projects, he is requiring the law firm that he's working with to be able to use the SALI tags for the work that they're doing on this project for Microsoft.
Jason is like head of innovation or something in the legal department at Microsoft.
That's exactly right. So I would say that, again, any reporter, if they talk to one person within an organization, that person may not know all of the things that are being done on behalf of that organization by maybe somebody else that person might not know about. So I would say that assessment is mistaken. We are the primary legal data standard in the world, and we're getting wild adoption. On a given week, Jim and I have calls, maybe 8 or 9 different calls from law firms, vendors, and clients, all of whom are scrambling to adopt SALI because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Still, you have probably a lot farther to go in getting the kind of broad adoption that you ultimately would want to have. So how do you do that? Is it just kind of you keep banging the drum and enlist people as quickly as you can, or is there a broader plan around that?
Yeah, we're certainly playing the long game, and that's getting back to my, you can adopt SALI by doing 1 tag or 10,000 tags, right? So that's really, as we go through, maybe a law firm says, okay, I just want to do, first is just areas of law. I want to be able to standardize areas of law. And then maybe they move on to the next one is industries. I want to be able to standardize the industries that I'm doing. Okay, cool. Now I'm going to standardize the services. So there's an agile approach to this. That is the agile as a software development standard saying, you don't build a car. First, you build a skateboard that turns into a bicycle, that turns into a motorcycle, that turns into a car. So in the same way, SALI adoption is, you could do the skateboard of SALI adoption, adopting a few tags, and then you adopt a few more and adopt a few more. And pretty soon you have a car. It's the same idea.
Yeah.
And of course, the vendor adoption is going to accelerate that process because if iManage adopts all of SALI, and if NetDocuments adopts all of SALI, and if TR adopts all of SALI, then of course that's going to start the snowball rolling even faster for the law firms to adopt it.
Yeah. You've mentioned earlier that your members, is that what you're calling them, members? I mean, that you've got corporate clients such as Microsoft, you have major legal tech vendors, you have major law firms. What about smaller law firms? So what does this mean for them, and are they involved in this in any way?
Well, I will say, as somebody who worked for small law firms, that is, I've worked for 30 lawyer firms. I worked for a 15 lawyer firm. So I will say that SALI is equally beneficial to those small law firms as they are to the large law firms. And we at SALI are counting things that matter to those small law firms, just like we're counting things that matter to the large law firms. So I will say that small law firms are the beneficiaries of what we're doing, and they provide input to us. That is, we have many people that are lawyers for small law firms that are, for example, saying, here are the immigration law things that you should be building out. Here are the bankruptcy law things that you should be building out. Here are the criminal law things that you should be building out. So all that's to say is that even if someone is not a quote unquote member of SALI, we welcome all input from all stages of law practice, whether they're the biggest law firms in the world to the smallest in the world. Happy to integrate their good ideas into building standard.
Yeah. Do you know if vendors like practice management providers, I mean a Clio in my case kind of thing, or if time and billing providers are accounting providers are beginning to incorporate these standards into their own product design?
They've certainly expressed interest in doing it, and it's because SALI is free and open source. It's hard for us to have visibility into after they've expressed interest, have they adopted it or have they not adopted it? Right? Sometimes they adopt it without telling us. So I can say that lots of legal practice management vendors have expressed interest for obvious reasons, because we're counting the things that matter to the business of law and to the substance of law, and of course that's what practice management does the intersection of. So all that's to say, yes, we've had many practice management vendors express interest, and I hope that they're following through by implementing that.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to make huge sense for both for the portability of data, I would think, and for interoperability, as you said early in this recording, and whether you're in a small firm or a big firm, those are major considerations.
That's right. And really, because yes, we will help for the portability, which might scare some vendors to say, well, gosh, if my customer's data is more portable, then maybe I have less stickiness. But I would say perhaps the opposite is that if you are touting yourself as being a SALI standard, people are maybe more likely to go with you because, much like Google they used to have called the data liberation army, where if you wanted to export your data from Google, you could just hit a button and all the data gets exported. And I think that increased their customer base because they said, okay, we're not locked in with Google, we can move. But then the customers like Google so much they don't move, right?
Yeah.
So I would say that providing that interoperability actually is a benefit to customer retention rather than a detriment.
Right. In law, it should be. I mean, there are ethics opinions out there that say that a lawyer should not engage with a vendor for something like practice management in which they're not able to export their data and move it to another platform. That's been spelled out in a number of ethics opinions. So I think that's now that doesn't mean they always make it easy, but they should certainly be doing it anyway.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I 100% agree. And I would say that you're mentioning legal practice management reminded me that there are three types of standards, of which SALI is only one. That is, when people talk about standardization, they talk about number one, metadata standardization. That's what SALI does, right? Most to dismiss, Southern District of New York.
Yeah.
But number two is the content standardization. We at SALI are beginning to pull out all of the clauses for contracts. So force majeure is a clause that we are counting, right?
Yeah.
But on the second one, what is the content? What is a force majeure? What is a standard force majeure clause? That's not something that SALI does, right? That is something that, one NDA is doing kind of content standards.
Right.
And then the third type of standard is the process standard. How do you do this type of matter?
Right.
Of course, SALI is not doing those things. So, one metadata standard, two content standard, and three process standard. SALI is, I would say, only one of those three. But I would argue is fundamental to doing the other two. First, you have to be able to say that there is a force majeure clause before you can say what is the standard force majeure content, and then how to be able to say the process for doing force majeure clauses is this. So all that's to say that, yes, project management and case management software certainly can incorporate metadata from SALI to be able to help all of those goals.
Yeah. What about with regard to some of the experiments we're seeing going on in this country around enhancing access to justice? And, the sandbox is developed in Utah, the Arizona program, which has gone farther than a sandbox at this point. Both of those programs and others that are being talked about are hanging their hats in part on using data to track effectiveness and outcomes and results. So are you working with any of those programs, or is SALI being incorporated in any of those programs as a way of tracking the success of those efforts?
Yes, is the short answer. The longer answer is that there's the list taxonomy. That is the one used by the legal aid organizations, the national organization whose acronym I'm forgetting. But they have their taxonomy of things.
Legal Services Corporation.
I'm sorry, Legal Services Corporation. Thank you. So the Legal Services Corporation, Margaret Hagan from Stanford and David Colarusso from Suffolk have created what's called the list taxonomy to be able to say, okay, here's the standard for legal aid organizations and Legal Services Corporation for the things that matter to the customers of those legal aid and the clients of the legal aid organizations. So all that's to say is that I have done some mapping between that list taxonomy and to SALI and have incorporated into SALI some of the things that they've done. And that's an ongoing process that I know Quentin Steenhuis of Suffolk is also doing some work on that. And a similar idea is that Quentin is doing a lot of forms database to be able to say, in this court for this matter, you have to file this type of form. So we at SALI are collecting all the types of forms that matter to him. And we're also building the relationships between this form is filed in this court and in this jurisdiction. So, for example, this Massachusetts, I don't know if it's county court or whatever the denominational court is, but to be able to say we're building those in a graph way to be able to connect all of those things. So all that's to say is, yes, we're doing some of that work today, and we would welcome doing a lot more of that work because we think that SALI has a lot to offer to the legal aid and access to justice space.
Yeah. All right. Well, I know you're on vacation, and I've already kept you away from your family for 45 minutes. But what else would you like to point out? What else would you like to talk about with regard to SALI or say that we haven't covered before we wrap up here?
I would say that when people say the words taxonomy and ontology, eyes tend to glaze over, and I would say think of it not as the process of how do I create an ontology, but think of the benefits that come from SALI. And the benefit is much like you go to Amazon and you're able to say, okay, show me all the sporting goods, right? And show me all of the things that matter to me. The way that Amazon gets to a sporting goods tag is they had somebody tag sporting goods. They had to tag a jersey with sporting goods. And of course, that jersey is not just tagged with sporting goods, but it's also tagged with clothing. And it's also tagged with sports memorabilia. Each of those is a tag too. So you can think of it as the benefit is that once you now tag the jersey with sports memorabilia and clothing and et cetera, you can then be able to run analytics and be able to get benefits from it. So think of, SALI as not as an eyes glaze over, but boy, this can really solve a big problem that we at the legal industry have. It can not only solve my internal problem, that is how I count things internally, but also solve how I'm able to ingest data from Fastcase Docket Alarm, from TR, from Lexis in a uniform way, and have my data essentially be interoperable with theirs without having to do a one-to-one mapping to each of those. That is, if I have 500 fields internally, if I want to run to TR, I have to map all 500 of those fields to TR. And then if I switch to Lexis, I'm going to have to map all those again, all 500. And then if I go to Fastcase, I'm going to have to map all 500. Why not just map it once to SALI? And because TR and Lexis and Fastcase have all adopted SALI, you map once and you're getting the benefit of that mapping hundreds of times.
Yeah, no, I think it's an important point. And it does start to sound a little geeky and in the weeds when we talk about it. Maybe that's my fault for some of the questions I was asking about it. But you're right. You really have to look at the value that you get out of this and what it can mean going forward. But I do wonder when I think about it whether that can partly be a speed bump in terms of adoption of it. Because if you're in an organization that is technologically astute or that has people within the organization who are technologically astute, you can get it more easily. But if you're in an organization that doesn't have that kind of knowledge or those kind of people, seeing the value of this might be more difficult for them.
And I would say, we've talked about XML and graph databases, that kind of thing. So if you're in a less sophisticated organization, that I would argue almost all law firms and lawyers are in a less sophisticated organization, one way to think about it is, what are the things we're counting? And think of those as rows in a spreadsheet. So here are the 500 things that we're counting in a law firm. And then what you're naming it is column A. And really all SALI adoption is creating a column B and saying, okay, for this thing that we're counting, column B has the SALI analog to what we're already counting. So in that way, it's not daunting at all. It's just, doing adding columns to a spreadsheet. That is one column to a spreadsheet, the SALI column. And once you've done that, you're able to see both, one, the things that SALI has that you don't yet have, and you realize, oh gosh, it'd be a good idea to count those things. That's thing number one. Thing number two is you could say, we are internally counting some things that SALI doesn't yet have. If that happens, let us know. And we'll add those to SALI, right? So that's the benefit of this community. And then thing number three is, if you want to get really ambitious, you're able to then develop the relationships, saying that maritime negligence is related to maritime law, which is argued in maritime court, which is related to the transportation and logistics industry. If you want to get really fancy, you can do that. But do the agile approach. Build a skateboard first. You can build a car later, but just build a skateboard now.
Well, Damien, thank you very much. I really wanted to ask you about your music project. We're going to have to do that on another podcast, I think. That sounds like a fascinating project, but there are some videos and materials up on that if anybody's interested. Just Google your name. But thanks so much for taking time out of your vacation, and thanks for all the work that you do in developing and pushing this forward. It's really important work, and I guess thanks to Fastcase for giving you some leeway to do this stuff. I know you have a day job as well, so thanks.
Yeah, and yes, I would also give my thanks to Fastcase. Fastcase is donating my time that I give to SALI largely to benefit the legal industry. They say that this rising tide will float all the boats, and so Fastcase has been very generous in donating my time to be able to do this. So, and of course, it also benefits Fastcase by incorporating all the SALI things into Fastcase Docket Alarm right away. So, thanks so much for having me on, Bob. I really few things more exciting than talking about legal tech and artificial intelligence. So I'm thrilled to do it with you.
Well, thanks. And enjoy the rest of your vacation. See ya.
Thanks so much.
Bye. My sincere thanks to Damien Riehl for taking time away from his vacation to be with me today. And thanks to him for all he is doing to further the Standards Project, all, as he said, on a volunteer basis. What are your thoughts on today's show? Share them by tweeting us at LawNextPodcast. Law Next is produced, engineered, and edited by Populous Radio. I'm your host, Bob Ambrogi. I hope you'll join us again next time for another episode of Law Next.